It's time for me to teach you a really important lesson on how to focus with our Nikon D750. If we think about it in terms of the how, the when, and the where the camera is focusing, this is going to be easy. Let's talk about the how. On most modern cameras, when you push the shutter button halfway down, that engages the auto-focusing. When we push the shutter button down all the way, it's going to take a picture. Pretty straightforward. Let's talk about the when, the camera's focusing modes. There's 3 of them. This is whether the camera is engaging its focus one time and holding it, such as in a single servo, or whether this is a repeated, continuous, predictive focus, really great for sports. Now, if you notice on the left side of the camera as you hold it, there's going to be a little switch here that points to AF, which stands for autofocus. And you also have the M, so we can turn the focusing system off and use our manual focus. So if your camera isn't focusing, you might want to check this. We're going to leave it on autofocus. There's a little button, kind of obscure control, but we're going to push this button down and look through the viewfinder. Now when we rotate, holding this down, when we rotate our thumb control wheel, we're going to see different sets of information changing in the bottom left-hand corner of our viewfinder. The first mode I want to talk about is AFS, which stands for Autofocus Single Servo. What this means is that when we push the shutter button halfway down and hold it down, the camera gets a focus lock. This is indicated in the bottom left-hand corner with a white circle. If you have your beep turned on, you will also hear this beep thing. Drives me crazy. This is very useful for shooting subjects that do not move. Portraits, for example, because you can get a focus lock on your subject and you can move the camera holding the shutter button halfway down. Focus will not change. The reason why we would want to do something like that is to make our subject more aesthetically pleasing in terms of a composition. Push it down all the way, then it takes the picture. We'll be talking more about this when we cover the portrait crash course later on in the video. The second focusing mode I want to talk about is AFC, which stands for Autofocus Continuous. What this means is that when we engage the focusing system on this mode, the camera is going to focus over and over and over again. And the purpose of this is to try to predict where a moving subject will be by the time we push the shutter button down all the way. It's great for things like birds or cars, athletes running, football players. If you have some crazy little kids that like to run around, perfect for them. The focusing system stays on, essentially. Great for sports. The third focusing mode I want to point out is AFA. It's simply a hybrid of the first two. The camera has permission to try to guesstimate whether this is a still subject or whether it's a moving subject. If it's still, it's going to use a single servo. If it's moving, the camera is going to try to predict where your subject's going to be. I use this mode almost exclusively when I would shoot events, particularly weddings, because you might have a bride who's standing there and now she's walking down an aisle, now she's cutting a cake, and now she's dancing, now she's standing there talking. Great for subjects that move sort of fast, and then they stop, and then they start moving again, and then they stop. But in all honesty, I like to stick to AFC for fast-moving subjects. So those are the focusing modes. The when the camera is focusing: single servo, continuous servo, or a hybrid of the two. Now let's talk about the where, the focusing squares. We change our focusing squares a little bit differently. We're going to push and hold, again, the focus mode button, and then we're going to rotate the primary selector. It's next to your index finger. So looking through the viewfinder, as we rotate this, we see different sets of information in the bottom right hand of our viewfinder. The first and the most important one I want to talk about is S, which stands for single square. I use this one 99% of the time. When we look through our viewfinder, we see it's a single square, and we can change the position of that square by pushing on our directional pad as we look through the viewfinder. This is very important because it allows us to tell the camera specifically where to focus before we take the shot. Now, if we push on the OK button, it'll jump back to the center. It's kind of a nice way to reset it. Let's take a look at the other focusing groups or clusters, I like to call them. GRP, which stands for group. Now, looking through the viewfinder, we see this as 4 adjacent squares. We can also move this cluster around by pushing on our directional pad. And what this does is it tells the camera to look in a wider area for the subject, better for things that are a little bit closer to us. Continuing on, the next cluster type is auto. What this means is that we're giving the camera permission to focus on the subject closest to us. I never use it. Now, those first 3 focusing clusters you will see on autofocus single. When we flip the mode over to autofocus continuous, there are going to be actually 4 more clusters. And so we're going to select autofocus continuous. Now I'm going to single, and right after single we see D9. D9 means that we can tell the camera to look into 9 adjacent squares side by side. We're telling it to look for the subject in that area. It allows the camera to make slight changes in its focusing or predictive focus for a moving subject. If we want to expand the area further, we could go to D21. We can also shift that cluster around. And if we want to make that area even a little bit bigger, we can go to D51. Now, when you're actually shooting with D9, D21, and D51, it's going to appear as a single square. Just know that you're giving the camera permission to look in a little bit wider area should the square no longer be on the subject you're shooting. Again, if we go a little bit further, we're going to see our group, our auto. But the last one I want to talk about is called 3D. 3D is very innovative. It's cutting edge, focusing, tracking. The way this works is that we give the camera permission to actually change the focusing squares for us on a moving subject. That's kind of a cool thing to do, is just take your finger up in front of the camera, get a halfway depression, and move your finger around. The focusing squares will actually change and track it. Now, when it works, it is amazing. Just know that it doesn't always work perfectly. It gets better in every Nikon camera that comes out. So we've talked about a lot of information. This is the focusing system through the viewfinder. We still need to talk about the focusing system in live view. We talked about the how. Push the shutter button halfway down. We've talked about the when, whether it's a single focus lock or if it's a continuous repeated focus prediction. We've also talked about the where, the position of the focusing squares, and how to move them around. In any event, that is your crash course on the Nikon D750's focusing systems, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you found this video helpful, you may be interested in my crash course on the Nikon D750. I'll teach you the basics and show you how to shoot like a pro in no time. You can order it from the following link.